Hello, this is Pam. Welcome to Crochet Block of the Month. This is block number 24. Hope I didn't miss some of you on Zoom. I hung around for a while and nobody was there, so I decided I would just go ahead and go offline and record the class. So hopefully everything that you see in the video here will answer your questions. If it doesn't, you know you can always give me a call. Or come into the shop if you're local and we can go through it together. There's really only 2 rows in this particular block that we really need to go over. It's made up of half double crochets and front post treble crochet stitches and popcorn stitches. So what you get here, I'm hoping you can see, I'm using a new camera today, so you are my guinea pigs on here. You get a little flower pattern with this, with these front post trebles right here, and then a popcorn stitch making the head of the flower. And then you've got front post trebles going all the way up the sides, as well as down the center. Okay? All right, so I took some notes on this, and I found some of the wording to be a little much. I had to break it down. In particular, row 3. So let me move this one off and move this one on. Let me adjust there we go. Hopefully you can see that. So I've gone through one repeat of the pattern so far. You do these 3 times to make the full block. Row 1 is your chain row and your setup row. So you're going to use a larger hook, and I do recommend using a larger hook. There is a little bit of a tendency, because you start these front post trebles and they pull, to pull this in a little bit right here. So if your chain row or your foundation row is tight, it's going to make that worse. So I do recommend using one larger hook size to do your beginning chain row, which I've done here, and that worked out pretty well. I didn't get the puckering here. And then you're going to do a row, and you're going to chain 28, and then you're going to do half double crochets all the way across. You're going to go into the 3rd chain from the hook. In this pattern, they use the chain 2 at the beginning of the row, and every row begins with a chain 2. Counts as a half double crochet, and that's important for a couple of reasons. All right, so I'm going to point that out as we go along. So row 1 is your chain, and then half doubles all the way across. Row 2 is a wrong side row. Your odd number rows are going to be your even rows, and your odd number rows will be your right side rows, and your even numbered rows are going to be your wrong side rows. So I have just finished here a row 2, which is started with a chain 2 right there, and then you don't go into the stitch right here because the chain 2 is coming out of it, and this counts as a half double crochet. You go into the next stitch, and then you do half double crochets all the way across. You should have a total of 27 half double crochets when you're done, and you finish by going into the top of the chain 2 from the previous row, because that chain 2 counts as a stitch. Okay. All right, so I have finished a row 2. Row 3 starts with a chain 2. I always like to chain before I turn. And the very first thing we do is we do a front post treble crochet or a triple crochet around the next stitch on the row before last. There's a lot of row before last. So when you are doing these treble crochets, you're going to be dipping down The very first one, you're going to be going into the very first row, right down here. And then on your subsequent right side rows, you're always going to be going into the top of the previous. See how I caught the top of the previous treble crochet, front post treble, and I've caught the top there. I'm going to do the same thing here. All right, so you start with a double yarn over. Here is the treble crochet. The top of it is in the row before last. Here's the last row. Here's the row before last. I'm going to go into and go underneath. Turn it sideways. I'm going all the way underneath. Grab my working yarn and come back. And then I pull it up just a little. You don't want to pull it up super high because you want this treble is not coming up, it is actually going down. So I'm going to pull up just a little, but not too much. Yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Okay? And when it's done, it shouldn't be really high up. It should just be one row. The top of it should be one, like the beginning of the new row that we're making. Okay? So that's the first part of row 3. And I have written that down. I wrote out row 3 line by line so I could break it into pieces. It was just easier to remember to read it that way. And now here starts our repeat. We're going to skip the next stitch on this row behind the front post treble you just made. So if I look here, if I pull this treble forward, here's where my chain was, and here's the stitch that my front post treble is laying on top of. It's covering it up. It's taking the place of that stitch. So we're not going to make a stitch there because it would throw our stitch count off. We're going to go ahead and go into the next stitch. So remember, the chain 2 was our first stitch. Here's the stitch we're skipping, and we're going into the next space. And we are going to make we're going to make a half double crochet in the next 2 stitches. Start with a yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through all 3 loops. There's 1, there's 2. Okay, there's the first part of our repeat. So we just did a half double in each of the next 2 stitches on this row. All right, now we're going to skip the next 4 stitches on the row before last and do a front post treble around the next stitch on the row before last. So now we're going to make another front post treble stitch. But this time we're not going to dip and go straight down. We're going to skip 4 stitches and make it into the 5th. And I'm going to show from the first time I did it how that worked. Here was my front post treble I'd made, and then I skipped 1 stitch, 2 stitches, 3 stitches, 4 stitches, and I did my front post treble around the 5th stitch. And because it's way over, that's how you get the leaning front post treble. So now let's do it up here on this row. So here's the one I just made. I'm going to skip, I'm trying to hold it up straight so it's easier to see. I'm going to skip 1, 2, 3, 4, and go into the 5th one right here. Double yarn over, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. So you're going to have this leaning front post treble, which is like one of the leaves on our flower. Okay. Now we're going to go back to the row we're working on. We are going to skip the stitch that the top of this front post treble is covering. So our last stitch was attached right here. can see it was attached right here. So I'm going to skip this one and I'm going to make half double crochet in this next one. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to be making one and then another. So half double once and then twice. Okay. Now it wants me to do this now another time, another front post treble, but instead of skipping 4 on the row before last, I'm going to go into the very next stitch. This is going to be the center stem of our flower. It's going to go straight up and down. So if I were to kind of hold this stitch should be lining up with the next stitch I would be going into, and that looks correct. That's a way to check. Double yarn over. I'm going into, I did a one around this one. Now I'm going to go into this one. Yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Okay. There we go. So this one's leaning to the right, this one's going straight up and down. I'm going to lower this just a little. It'd be a little easier to see. Okay. Now I'm going to skip the stitch on the current row. So I was attached to this one. I'm going to skip this one and I'm going to do 2 half doubles again. So I've got to keep my stitches moving across the current row even though the base of my front post trebles are in rows before last. Double yarn over, go into the very next stitch on the row before last and make another front post treble. Yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, oops, pull through 2. Okay. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to skip the one that this is in front of, and then I'm going to make 2 half doubles. 1, 2. And I've got the leaves and the stem. Okay. Now, if I've done this correctly, I should be ready to go around the front post here, following my pattern. And it should line up nice and straight. And if it doesn't, which it looks like mine might be a little wonky, it means that you maybe haven't done your, no, that actually looks okay, that you haven't done your half doubles in the correct spot. Maybe you didn't skip a space, or maybe you skipped too many spaces. But this center, like a ridge, should line up row by row. All right, now we're going to repeat. We're going to skip one. We're going to do 2 half doubles. And then I'm going to make a front post treble, 4 over from this last one that I just made. So I'm going to skip 1. I'm going to line it up here so you can see. I'm tied into this one here. So I'm going to skip 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's my 5th. Okay. Let's do this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's my 5th. I kind of hold my thumb on it so I don't lose the spot. And it should line up after you've gone through the first repeat of this. It should line up with the one from below, and it looks like it does. Okay. I'm going to skip 1, so I'm attached. And if you bend this front post treble forward, it's easier to see the stitch that you need to skip. If you are having a hard time finding the stitch that you need to skip, before you make the front post treble, this is the stitch you're going to skip because I'm attached here. I'm going to skip this. You could put a stitch marker there or into the stitch you want to go into to help you see where it is. All right, so this is the one I'm going to be going into right there. But first, I'll do my front post treble again. Let's count over 1, 2, 3, 4 around the 5th. Skip 1, 2 half doubles. Okay, now I'm going to be making a front post treble around the very next stitch. 2 and 2. We're going to skip that one and then 2 half doubles. And then I'm going to do one more for the other leaf right next to here, and it should be leaning to the left. Double yarn over. You got to make sure you put those 2 half doubles in between each of these front posts, or you won't have enough stitches for your next row. And it will be a little bit gappy. All right, so I've got another set of leaves. Going to skip a stitch that my front post treble is in front of, and 2 half doubles. Skip that one. 1, 2, and a front post treble around the top of this one. Get in, there we go. And then 1 half double in the very last stitch, which is the top of the chain 2 from the row below. Move that up a little. And there you have that row. Here's what I suggest. I should still have 27 stitches. So I would, at this point, after you've done this row 3, and again after you've done row 5, double check that you still have 27 stitches, including the chain 2 you started with. Okay? If you don't, something has gone awry. Maybe you forgot a half double. If you need to make up a stitch, make it up in the other rows, which are simply half double crochets. If it looks okay, but your stitch count is off, see if you can figure out, like, oh, maybe it's a little, I've got a little too much here, so add an extra stitch over here. Or if you've got too many, where do you need to decrease? So you do have a little bit of play if you need to. You don't have to rip out. Okay, I'm going to pause the recording and be right back, and we'll start with row 5. Okay, I went ahead and I worked across row 4, which is a chain 2, half double all the way across. I've double checked my count. I do in fact still have 27 half double crochets, including my chain 2 at the beginning. So I'm going to chain 2 and turn, and this is where we're going to be making the popcorn stitch at the top of the flower stem. I tried this several ways. The pattern is a little it's a little hard to understand. It reads front post treble around the next post stitch on the row before last. So that's right here. We're going to do that. I'm going to continue my front post treble. I do this on each end and again in the middle. I will be skipping the stitch behind it. And then I'm going to half double crochet in each of the next stitches on this row. It says in each of the next stitches. It does not tell you to skip this stitch behind the front post treble, but you need to, or your stitch count will be wrong. So I'm going to skip that one and do 5 half doubles. 1, 2, pull out some yarn, 3, 4, and 5. Now, I should be almost right over the center stem of my flower. Here's how they describe to do the popcorn stitch. Working around the stitch on the last row and in top of the front post treble on row before last, 5 half double crochets in the next stitch. Drop the loop from the hook, insert hook in first half double of the group, pull through, dropped loop. Okay, I tried to understand what they meant. Here's how I got it to look right. If you look, basically what we have to figure out is where are we going to insert our hook to make the popcorn stitch, okay? The popcorn stitch is made up of 5 half double crochets all into the same space, and then we release the last loop, we go back to the first loop, and we thread them in and it cinches it up. So I'll show you that part. It's where to make the popcorn that I struggled with. So here's where I figured out the easiest way. If you look at the top of your center stem, just to the right of it is a little hole. That's where you're going to make your popcorn stitch, okay? That's what you're going to do one there and a cross over here on your center one. We're going to do it right there, okay? That's what I found makes it look like it's sitting on top of that center stem without being twisted sideways. All right, so we're going to do 5 half double crochets into this hole just to the right of that front post treble that we did. So yarn over, I'm going to go into the hole. I had to start new yarn, so I've got some ends back there. Yarn over, pull through all 3 loops. There's 1. And this is going to make that hole pull a little big, and that's okay. 2, 3, all into the same hole. 4, and 5. Okay, so now I've got 5 double crochets coming out of that one space. I'm going to release the loop on the hook. I'm going to go back to the first half double crochet I made of this cluster. So here's the last one, so I'm going to count back 5. So that's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to insert my hook underneath there. I'm going to put that loop back on my hook, and I'm going to pull it through. And it cinches that cluster and really sets it up on top of that stem. I tried kind of going around, like they said, the top of the row below and the top of that, and it didn't sit right. This is the way I got it to look the best. Okay. Now, we've just done this whole cluster and we've buried some stitches on the back. It's sometimes hard to see. So, a couple of things you can do about where to put your next stitch. The next part of the pattern on row 5 says to do 5 half double crochets in the next 5 stitches of this row, and then we're going to be making our front post here. So we could count back 5. So I'm going to put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here's where I need to go. I need to make 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then this one will be my front post treble. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it, to make sure I'm going to pull out my popcorn, would be before you start your popcorn, figure out what the stitches you're going to be skipping. Right there, my next stitch is going to need to go here. And if I could lay my hands on a stitch marker, I could put that there. Let's see if I was not prepared to show you that. Sorry. Okay. So I'll be skipping this stitch here. And you can use just about anything as a stitch marker. Here's where I'll be putting my next stitch. And then I'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then here's where I'll put my front post. So by putting that there, then I don't have to wonder. If you have a hard time finding the stitch, you can either count back or mark it. And sometimes marking it's just easier. So I'm going to go back and put my popcorn stitch back in. I'm going to go over those ends as I do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, now this stitch is clear where I have to make my next one. Pull up your loop, count back, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Insert your hook, grab your loop, and whoops, tighten it up and pull it through. And you've got a nice popcorn stitch, and it's clearly marked where I have to make my next stitch. 5 half doubles. I'm going to remove that now. So doing this, marking that stitch so that you can find it, whether you're doing the popcorn stitch or the front post trebles, can really help. And then you're not wondering if you're going in the right place and have to redo things. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And now I'm ready to do a front post treble. So catching the top of that one that we previously did. Pull through, pull through, pull through. Again, I could have marked this stitch, or the stitch I need to go into. And do 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right on top of my stem again, which is perfect. I'm going to be skipping that stitch. So I'm going to mark the stitch I want to make. And here's the hole just above and to the right of my center stem front post treble. And make my popcorn stitch. 5 double crochets. Popcorn stitch can be any number going into a place, and they don't have to be half double crochets. This particular pattern calls for half double crochets. They can be double crochets, they can be triple crochets, but the making them all into one space, and I've done 1, 2, 3, 4, one more, and then releasing this loop, going back to the first one you made, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Grabbing that loop and pulling it through is essentially the popcorn part of the stitch. So this could be in double crochets. It could not really singles. They don't pop very well, but trebles. They could be a variety of things. So you might see a popcorn stitch written differently, but that release of the loop, going back to the first stitch and pulling it through, is the key to a popcorn stitch. All right, so there I've got my space. I know where I'm going to do my next 5 half double crochets. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now I am ready to do a front post treble, attaching it to the top of the previous front post treble. So double yarn over to start, go underneath there, grab the yarn and come back. Yarn over, pull through 2, pull through 2, pull through 2, and I'm going to make a going to skip this stitch, and I'm going to be putting my last stitch, which is the top of the chain 2, a half double crochet. Oh, I'm so relieved that it worked out. Okay. So every other row is really just doing half double crochets across. Check your counts. If you've got questions, don't hesitate to give me a call or send us an email. We can always hop on Zoom and I can set up the camera and demonstrate anything for you. Also, don't worry about these sides looking a little wonky. Chain 2 and then making a half double into a chain 2 can give you kind of a wonky edge. You remember you're going to be putting a border on it like I've done on this one. I did have a very wonky edge, but look how the border just smooths it all out. It makes it look great. Thanks for joining me for block 24. The end of the month, the end of August, we'll be doing the August block. This was technically the July block. And we'll be doing block number 25. So hope to see you guys soon. Take care and don't hesitate to call if you've got questions. Bye-bye.